To the people of Marlow, Ohio, population 6,140 on a good year, Tom Granger was exactly what he appeared to be. A solitary, gruff, but good-hearted mechanic who ran his auto shop on the edge of town. Granger's Auto and Diesel had been a fixture in Marlow since the mid-90s. Its hand-painted sign now faded and rusted at the corners, just like the classic Chevy pickups parked out front. It wasn't the most modern garage, and Tom wasn't the kind of man who worried much about Yelp reviews or online bookings. He still wrote estimates on carbon paper, and no one minded. Tom worked with a quiet efficiency, a cigarette always tucked behind one ear and a thick, oil-stained rag hanging from his back pocket. He rarely hired help, claiming he worked faster alone. The only person who came and went regularly was a kid named Jesse, a 17-year-old high school dropout who hung around after school, changing tires and sweeping the shop floor in exchange for lunch and pocket cash. To Jesse, Tom was a mystery and a mentor, one of the few adults who treated him like he wasn't useless. To Tom, Jesse was just a reminder that not all kids were beyond help. Tom's shop smelled like hot metal, old coffee, and motor oil. Radios from the 70s lined the back wall. A calendar from 2003 still hung above the office desk, perpetually turned to April. There were tool drawers labeled in Tom's neat block handwriting, some containing what you'd expect: wrenches, sockets, grease guns. Others held items that didn't belong in any mechanic shop: circuit boards, stripped-down microwave parts, old aviation-grade transistors. Nobody ever asked about those drawers, and Tom never volunteered answers. Sheriff Mullins, who'd been in Marlow nearly as long as Tom had, often stopped by for a tune-up and small talk. Mullins had tried more than once to get Tom to come to the 4th of July parade or join the VFW pancake breakfast. "You're practically one of us now, Granger," he'd say with a grin. Tom would just nod, hand over his invoice, and go back to the engine bay. He wasn't unkind, just private. Mullins and others assumed Tom was a widower, or maybe a veteran with some ghosts he didn't like to talk about. When pressed, Tom would say, "I used to work west of here, long way west," and leave it at that. People respected his boundaries. That was the kind of town Marlow was. Folks didn't pry, especially if you charged fair prices and fixed their transmissions right the first time. But there were things, odd things that most ignored or chalked up to eccentricity. Like the fact that Tom never used a smartphone. His internet, when it worked, ran through a satellite dish bolted onto the roof by hand. He didn't have cable, didn't vote, and paid for everything in cash. He owned a battered old radio scanner that could pick up signals miles beyond town. He spent hours at night tinkering with strange glowing devices in the shed behind the shop machines no customer had ever seen brought in for repair. One summer evening, Jesse had wandered into the shed looking for a new box of latex gloves. What he saw confused him. A partially disassembled engine block connected to something that looked like a laptop, but was built into a steel briefcase. Wires ran into it from the ceiling. Beside it sat a tall copper cylinder that gave off a soft, pulsing hum. Tom had snapped at him more than he ever had before, telling him to stay out of that goddamn room unless you want your eyebrows burned off. Jesse never mentioned it again. As summer gave way to fall, Tom grew quieter. He spent more time watching the skies, checking the horizon, and keeping a loaded 12-gauge within arm's reach inside the office. At night, his silhouette could be seen through the shop window moving slowly, as if measuring and calibrating something unseen. No one knew that. Tom Granger had once held federal clearance levels, so high he had to pass through 3 biometric checkpoints just to get to his desk. No one knew that before Granger, he had gone by a different name altogether, one wiped from every civilian database after a classified incident in Nevada went catastrophically wrong. An incident that ended his career, erased his identity, and left him with secrets no man should carry alone. But those secrets hadn't stayed buried. Unbeknownst to the town of Marlow, a quiet ripple had started online. A post Tom had made under a pseudonym Rotoghost 42 on a forgotten engineering message board had caught the attention of someone he'd hoped would never notice. It was a harmless curiosity, or so he thought, a question about energy dispersion in old jet turbine models, phrased in just the wrong way. Too technical, too exact. It lit up red flags in a database somewhere, deep in the invisible web of defense intelligence monitoring. When two government analysts in Virginia pulled up the post and ran its metadata, their eyes widened. They didn't know who Rotoghost 42 was, but the post matched signature phrasing and technical detail from a decommissioned weapons program filed under Project Halcyon, a program that should have been dead for 30 years. Tom didn't know it yet, but he had been found. And in the quiet heart of a small Ohio town, the past was about to roar back to life louder, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone, even Tom, could have imagined. The man Marlowe knew as Tom Granger was never supposed to exist, not on paper, not in memory. Before Ohio, before wrenches and rust, his name had been Marcus Elliott, and he had been one of the brightest minds in military propulsion technology. At just 29, he had been handpicked out of MIT for a classified defense program, so secretive it operated outside of the Department of Defense's official budget. It was called Project Halcyon, and it existed in the shadows of the Nevada desert, miles from any map, deeper than any civilian ever knew to look. Project Halcyon was designed to push the boundaries of unmanned aerial systems drones. Yes, but far beyond the crude flying eyes of today. These were to be intelligent, adaptive, and capable of navigating hostile airspace without GPS. Their propulsion systems used non-standard electromagnetic pulse disruptors, fed by experimental onboard energy cells that were never publicly acknowledged. Marcus thrived in the lab. He didn't care much for chain of command or military politics. He was obsessed with the science, the future. His section Unit R was tasked with developing a propulsion control system that could sustain silent flight across 300 miles without detectable heat signature. He succeeded. Too well. The prototype, nicknamed Whisperkite, launched in the winter of 1987. But something went wrong. The system didn't just fly. It scrambled radar signals over 3 southwestern states. Civilian air traffic was diverted. A private jet's instruments failed mid-flight. A communications satellite glitched out over Los Angeles for 40 seconds. No one publicly acknowledged the incident, but internally, chaos erupted. Project Halcyon was shut down overnight. All records were sealed. Engineers were interrogated. Some detained. And Marcus? He ran, but he didn't run impulsively. He knew the consequences of staying. He wiped his prints from every entry log, destroyed personal blueprints, and vanished. The lab never even had a picture of him, just ID numbers and access logs. It helped that Marcus had always been solitary, someone who left no footprint unless required. It helped that no one could prove what he'd taken with him, and he had taken something, not hardware, not physical materials that would have been suicide, but knowledge. Formulas, calibration sequences, field modulation techniques, he had them all memorized. They had built Whisperkite from his designs. He didn't need a schematic. It was etched into his mind, locked away like a dangerous prayer. He drove east in a beat-up Ford Bronco with expired plates, sleeping at truck stops using burner cash. For a while, he worked under assumed names in repair shops across Pennsylvania, Indiana, and finally, southern Ohio. In the small town of Marlow, where people were more concerned about their tractors than surveillance, he stayed. He paid cash. for a derelict auto garage, spent a year fixing it up, and slowly introduced himself as Tom Granger, just a tired man from out west, looking for peace and purpose. He never used his real name again. Years passed. The world moved on. He watched the news from a distance. Satellites improved. Drones became common. But none of them touched what he had seen. None of them came close to Whisperkite. The military had buried it too deep, and the men who funded it were long gone or locked away. Or so he thought. As Tom settled into his life as a mechanic, the itch returned. Not the urge to run, but to build. In the back of his shop, he began experimenting again, not to create weapons, but to reconstruct the ideas that haunted him. He wanted to understand what went wrong that day in the desert, whether the prototype could have worked with more time, whether it could be made safe. He built in secret. Small tests, never outside. He scavenged parts from scrapyard circuit. Boards, capacitors, small aviation modules sold off from decommissioned planes. He modified the timing in common spark ignitions, replacing them with experimental magnetic fields. Jesse, the teenage helper who swept his floors and fetched bolts, had no idea what half the devices even were. Neither did Tom's customers, who came and went with no clue of the experiments humming behind the back wall. But curiosity crept in. Tom had questions he couldn't answer alone, technical equations he wanted to verify. So one night, he found himself on a forgotten corner of the internet, an engineering message board used by hobbyists, ham radio tinkerers, and aging Cold War veterans. He created a profile, RotorGhost42, anonymous, careful. Still, the devil was in the details. He posted a theoretical problem framed innocently about energy dispersion in early jet turbine models, using language and figures a little too precise. It was meant to draw no attention, just a technical debate. But intelligence software buried deep inside a digital surveillance system in Virginia flagged it. The language matched phrasing from Project Halcyon. The math was obscure but accurate, and the account location traced to Marlow, Ohio. That one post triggered a chain reaction. The Department of Defense received a quiet notification. A forgotten case file was reopened. And in a climate of rising domestic threats, the idea of a ghost from Halcyon reappearing even in words was enough to send black-suited agents onto the road. Tom didn't know any of this yet, but a week after that post, a pair of SUVs arrived at his shop. Two men stepped out, and with them, the life he had buried for 3 decades rose again, dragging secrets, danger, and consequences he'd long tried to forget. It was a Tuesday morning, cold and dry, the sky the color of unpolished steel. Tom Granger had just finished replacing the axle on a customer's F-150 when he saw the first SUV turn off the main road. It was black, spotless, government issue. The second one followed, identical. Both had rental stickers on the windshields, just subtle enough to be missed unless you knew where to look. Tom didn't flinch, but his hand still holding a socket wrench tightened. He wiped his palms on a rag and stood just outside the garage bay, watching them roll in like storm clouds. The two men who stepped out weren't from around here. Too pale, too polished, too uptight. The taller one wore sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. The shorter man carried a leather folder that didn't quite match his shoes. They didn't introduce themselves right away, didn't flash badges. That told Tom more than anything else. "Morning," said Sunglasses. "We're looking for a Thomas Granger." Tom nodded. "You found him. We're not here for trouble," the other added quickly. "Just hoping you can answer a few questions." "About what?" Sunglasses smiled. "An old combustion design thread you commented on recently. Use the handle RotorGhost42. Tom's expression didn't change, But his stomach dropped. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said casually. "I don't post online. My internet's mostly junk." The shorter man flipped open the folder and pulled out a printout. The post Tom had made was circled in red. Highlighted were specific terms: alternating magnetic disruption, pulse destabilization threshold, negative vector field control, technical jargon. Dangerous if you knew what to look for. Funny thing, the man continued, these concepts you mentioned, they're very niche. Some of them don't appear in any public documentation, not even academic. Looks like a lot of technobabble to me, Tom said, shifting his stance. You boys always drive across the country to investigate message boards? Sunglasses took a slow step forward. You know what the problem is, Mr. Granger? Sometimes people forget how many footprints they leave behind, even ghosts. Tom's jaw tightened. That word again. Ghost. I fix trucks, he said flatly. That's all. Then this should be easy, the shorter agent said, replacing the paper. If anything else comes up, we'll be in touch. They turned and walked back to the yaw. SUVs. But as they got in, Tom noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The taller man gave a short glance toward the fake security camera mounted above the garage entrance. The one Tom had installed himself. The one that wasn't connected to anything. That night, Tom didn't sleep. He sat alone in his shed, the door locked from the inside, a rusted space heater clicking in the corner. Before him, spread across an old metal table, were parts that didn't belong in any ordinary garage. Ceramic insulators, high-voltage capacitors, frequency regulators. At the center was a half-built prototype, his version of the EMD pulse emitter, a concept salvaged from Halcyon, scaled down to the size of a small generator. He hadn't meant for it to be functional. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. He had built it as a proof of concept, to understand the failures of the past, to settle an itch that had burrowed in his mind for 30 years. But now he wasn't so sure. The agent's visit meant his anonymity was compromised. That post had triggered a search a hit. Somewhere, someone with clearance had recognized the language, the math, or worse, him. It was only a matter of time before the next visit wasn't so friendly. Tom opened a hidden drawer beneath the table and pulled out a weathered composition notebook, one of the few physical things he'd kept from his former life. Inside were handwritten calculations, voltage ranges, signal patterns, none of which had been digitized. They were safe, for now. He flipped to a bookmarked page, where a warning was scribbled in red ink. EMD radius grows exponentially beyond 17.4 joules. Civilian interference possible. Do not test full charge. He looked up, eyes scanning the unfinished device in front of him. It wasn't just a theoretical concern anymore. If someone had copied his design, reconstructed it from that single post, it could be active, weaponized. And if it went off near infrastructure? Lights out, communications down, hospitals compromised. It would look like a freak failure. But he would know better. He closed the notebook and stood, his mind already turning to contingencies. If they were watching, he couldn't finish the build here. The shed was compromised. He needed a secondary location. And he needed to move the core, the pulse generator, to a safer place. By sunrise, he had disassembled the prototype and packed the critical components into a lead-lined toolbox. He drove 2 miles outside of Marlow to an abandoned quarry road and parked near a dry creek bed. There, beneath a fallen tree, he dug a hole nearly 3 feet deep and wrapped the core in foil, canvas, and another layer of shielding. He wasn't hiding a weapon, he told himself. He was protecting people from what it could do. Back at the shop, Jesse arrived at noon, late as usual. Tom greeted him with his usual grunt, but his mind was miles away. He noticed every car that passed by. He kept glancing at the shed door. When Jesse accidentally knocked over a pile of scrap, Tom barked hard. The kid looked startled, even a little hurt. But Tom didn't have time to explain. That evening, after Jesse left, Tom sat in his office with the lights off, staring at the parking lot. A van was parked across the street. No markings. No movement. It hadn't been there the day before. Tom was a man who had spent half his life hiding, but even he could sense when the hunt had begun. The government didn't knock twice. If they were circling him again, it wasn't about curiosity, it was about containment. And somewhere in the back of his mind, another fear had begun to grow. What if someone else had already built the device? Worse, what if they'd already used it? The shed behind Granger's Auto and Diesel had always looked unremarkable. The door was crooked from years of weather warping the frame. The window was fogged with old grease. Anyone walking by I've guessed it was filled with spare tires or broken compressors. But inside, past the rusted lock, past the shadowed workbench covered with decoy chainsaws and toolboxes, sat something no one in Marlow, Ohio, would have imagined. It looked like a cross between a military field generator and a homemade science experiment. Tangled wires and copper loops wrapped around a core of old aviation-grade metal, reinforced with ceramic shielding. An LCD screen bolted crudely to the frame, blinked with diagnostic lines, power readings, magnetic field stabilization, signal, spread predictions. It was controlled by a weatherproof laptop, stripped down to its motherboard and custom fitted with encrypted code. Code that Tom Granger had written from memory. He called it the box, part habit, part dark humor. And it wasn't just a machine. It was a prototype. A compact, weaponized electromagnetic pulse delivery device. The END prototype he'd first helped design during Project Halcyon had been the size of a delivery van, requiring a full power trailer to move it into test range. This version? It could fit in the trunk of a station wagon. Smaller, cleaner, and just as lethal in the right situation. Tom never meant for it to be operational. At least, that was the lie he told himself when he started building it. Initially, it was just meant to answer a question. Had they been wrong back then? Could it be built safer? Could it work without destabilizing nearby systems? But as the months went on and the nights grew longer, he went further than he planned. He installed safety overrides. He built field dampeners. He even added a manual short-circuit fail-safe, just in case. And one night, against all logic, against all the promises he'd made to himself, he tested it. Just for a second. He had connected the core to a custom battery pack and powered it to 3% capacity, barely a pulse. The garage lights had flickered. The digital clock on his microwave reset to 12 o'clock. The shop's computer rebooted. And 10 seconds later, the phone rang. No one spoke on the other end. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, after the visit from the men in black SUVs and the appearance of the unmarked van outside his shop, Tom had dismantled the box and hidden the core in the woods. But the rest of the components remained in the shed, scattered under tarps, sealed in false bottom crates and labeled with fake part numbers. If someone broke in, it would look like a pile of electrical junk. But Tom knew better, and he was certain someone else knew. The next morning, Tom went to check on the forest cache. It was early, just after sunrise. He hiked to the dry creek bed 2 miles outside town, near the quarry where he'd buried the device. The shovel cut easily through the soft earth, but as soon as he reached the final layer, his breath caught. The tarp had been moved. The knot he'd tied double loop, tight as steel, was looser now, rewrapped hastily. He tore back the tarp. Box's core was still there, still shielded, but someone had opened the canvas. The inner aluminum shielding had been cut, not torn. A precise incision, maybe with a field knife. And next to the container, barely visible in the dirt, was a boot print. Not his. He knelt down and touched the print. Recent. Size 11. Military soul. Tom stood slowly, ears ringing. He scanned the trees. Nothing moved. Someone had found it. Someone with training. He reburied the core with deliberate care, using a new marker, a strip of surveyor's tape tied to a tree branch. He didn't bother covering his tracks. Whoever had been there already knew the location. What mattered now was time. How much did they know? Had they copied it? Had they planted a tracker? Back in the garage, Tom tore apart the rest of the original prototype. He smashed the LCD screen. He wiped the drive from the control laptop, then physically removed the motherboard and burned it in a steel drum out back. Smoke curled into the sky like a signal. He didn't care anymore who saw. That evening, Tom pulled out a flip phone, one he hadn't touched in years. He inserted a SIM card from a sealed envelope and dialed a number he hadn't called since he vanished from the world. 3 rings. A click. Then silence. A voice finally answered. Male. Gruff. Tired. You're not supposed to use this number. Tom didn't hesitate. It's Marcus. They found me. A pause. Where? Marlow, Ohio. They came to the shop. I buried the core, but someone else already found it. They've been watching me for days, the voice grunted. Are you compromised? I don't know yet. But this isn't about me anymore. Someone has the design or built their own. Another long silence. Then the voice changed, hardened. Do not engage, do not run. Stay in place. Wait for extraction. I'm not looking for rescue, Tom said. I'm trying to prevent the next blackout. The line went dead. That night, Tom sat in the dark of his garage, gun resting on the desk, eyes fixed on the monitors he'd quietly installed over the years, motion-triggered cameras, wireless trip sensors. 2 hours passed. Nothing. Just wind through the alley and the buzz of dying insects in the fluorescent shop. Lights. But at 2:17 a.m., he saw it. On the monitor facing the back alley, a figure passed through the frame. Tall, broad, carrying something. Over his shoulder. The figure paused, looked directly at the camera, then raised a hand and held up 3 fingers. A signal. 3 fingers. Unit R. Someone from Halcyon was here. But why? Tom didn't sleep that night. The figure on the monitor, the one who stared directly into the lens and held up 3 fingers, haunted his every thought. 3 fingers. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was a message. Unit R. Halcyon's most secret subdivision. His division. The one that vanished after Whisperkite's disaster. The one no one was supposed to acknowledge, let alone resurrect in the middle of a dark Ohio alley. And if someone from Unit R was here, that meant 2 things. First, the government's leash on Halcyon tech had frayed. Second, and far worse, this wasn't a coincidence anymore. At dawn, Tom poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee and sat down at the desk in his shop's back office. In front of him were the remains of the burnt motherboard, the notebook with his notes, and a printed satellite image of Marlow. He'd spent hours plotting the nearest transformer grids, cell towers, substations, and emergency communication lines. His breath came slower now, measured, controlled. The fog of confusion was clearing, and the logic that had once earned him clearance levels above colonels had returned. Someone had taken interest in his design. But not just out of curiosity. They were moving, testing, searching, maybe even replicating. And then came the outage. It happened just after noon that Friday. The lights in the garage flickered, and for a moment, everything paused. Tom looked up from his desk as the fluorescent bulb above him dimmed, then cut out completely. The radio shut off. The old fridge in the corner groaned and stopped. Silence fell. He stepped outside. The entire block was dark. No hum from streetlights. No flicker of TVs behind windows. The diner across the street had a waitress standing in the doorway, mouth slightly open, phone pressed to her ear. She looked at Tom. "Your phone work?" She called out. Tom pulled out his flip phone and checked. No bars. Dead. He crossed the lot and walked to the street corner. From there, he could see the bank, the fire station, and the community medical clinic all blacked out. But the sky was clear. No storm, no wind. And crucially, the county lines hadn't gone dark. Only Marlowe. Only the place he lived. Back inside the shop, Tom paced. His mind ran simulations like it used to in the lab. The box had been capable of a localized EMP, range just over 2 miles in perfect conditions. He knew this because he'd calibrated it himself, adjusting for interference, urban density, and topographical resistance. This blackout wasn't an accident. Someone had activated a device. The question wasn't if, but who and why. Tom flipped through his notebook, found the original test values, and grabbed a pen. He circled a number, 17.4 joules. That had been the warning threshold. Beyond that, pulses began to cascade, feeding themselves in waves that could stretch far beyond the intended radius. The power spike last night must have reached or exceeded that number, which meant someone else had built a full working prototype 1 based on his original design, and he knew who might have enabled it. Himself. That forum post. That one careless comment under the Rotoghost 42 alias. It wasn't just a blueprint, it was a spark. He hadn't accounted for how desperate or smart people had become. Tom needed help, but not from law enforcement. Sheriff Mullins was a decent man, but he wouldn't understand the scope. The government agents? They might return, but it would be in force, not in conversation. So he turned to the only other person who might know how to read what had happened. He opened a dusty tin lunchbox from his top drawer and pulled out a contact card sealed in vacuum plastic. A number written in permanent marker. Callaway, -30299rs-silo.com. Dug out a burner satellite phone and connected it to an auxiliary battery. It was slow to connect, the signal bouncing off 2 regional towers before locking. It rang. Once, twice, click. A gruff voice. "Yeah, it's Marcus," Tom said, voice low. "We have a problem." Silence. Then, "Where?" "Marlowe. Just had a blackout localized. Duration, 6 minutes. No weather interference. My estimate, mid-range EMD. Weaponized. Looks like my math." Callaway didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Tom could hear the tap of keys on a secure keyboard. Finally, "We tracked a signature ping yesterday. Brief. Odd spectrum. But it didn't match known platforms. It matched Halcyon." Tom said. Another pause. Shit. "I think it's been cloned," Tom added. "Maybe even iterated. Someone used my post. Or followed me. You were supposed to stay dark. I did. For 30 years. There was a long sigh. "Stay there. Don't move. We'll send someone." "No." Tom shook his head. "They're already here." He hung up. That night, Tom didn't return home. He went to the edge of the woods and checked the burial site again. But when he arrived, the red tape marker he'd tied to the tree was gone. He ran to the stump, began digging with his hands. The core was gone, not stolen, not tampered with. Just ... sent. Someone had taken it. Someone who had known exactly where to look. His mind flashed to the alley camera. The figure with 3 fingers. Unit R? Was it a warning? A retrieval mission? Or a message that something darker had begun? Either way, it was too late. He wasn't the only one who could build the box anymore, and someone out there had already flipped the switch. For the first time in decades, Tom Granger felt fear, not the survival kind he'd lived with for years, but the deeper kind. A kind that gripped your lungs and refused to let go. A kind that whispered, "This is bigger than you know." The boxes. Core had vanished, and Marlowe had suffered a controlled blackout. That much was clear. But the message behind it was less so. This wasn't just surveillance. Any more. This was a signal. And someone out there wanted Tom to know they had his work back. At the garage, Tom tore open the floorboards beneath the old hydraulic lift and retrieved a hidden lockbox. Inside were a few emergency items, unregistered documents, a burner laptop wrapped in anti-static fabric, a folded satellite map of the Midwest, and a memory stick labeled simply Aegis. He hadn't touched it in over 15 years. He booted the laptop, disconnected from any network, and inserted the drive. Encrypted files blinked to life. Inside, the full theoretical breakdown of the box formulas, EMP field estimates, radii, power conversion ratios. The work he'd sworn to never let out of his hands. Work meant to stay buried forever. Now, someone else had replicated it, or worse, upgraded it. And the blackout? That had been a test, a demonstration. Someone had shown restraint only shutting down Marlowe, but restraint could break. The next pulse might not be limited to a town. It might be regional, national, and it would look like an accident unless someone knew what to look for. Tom sat still, heart pounding. He couldn't stop this alone. He dug into his drawer again and retrieved the burner satellite phone. The one he used to contact Calloway, the only person left from the old program who didn't want him dead or locked in a bunker. He redialed the secure number. "Yeah?" Calloway answered, immediately alert. "It's worse than we thought." Tom said, "The core's gone." "Gone how?" "Someone removed it clean. No mess. No trace." They knew where to look, how to avoid the trip sensors. Calloway was silent for a beat. "Unit R?" "I don't know. They left a sign ... but they didn't warn me. I think it's being reassembled elsewhere. I'll escalate it." Click. Keys in the background. "We've been monitoring chatter from domestic extremist forums. Last month, there was talk about rewiring the grid from the inside. Too abstract to act on. Now I'm not so sure. You said there was a ping yesterday. Where was it?" Calloway hesitated. "Tom, if this goes to certain hands, if the box is real, we're not just talking blackouts. We're talking command-level collapse, communications, defense systems, air traffic control. You remember the specs?" "I wrote the specs." Another pause. Then, "All right, you want to stop this? We do it together. Come in." Tom's stomach sank. "You mean DC? Not even close. We've got a secure facility in Nebraska. Cold War base. Off-grid. No connection to Halcyon records. We'll meet there. You'll brief the countertech team." "I'm not a soldier," Tom said. "You're worse. You're an engineer who knows exactly what they built and exactly how to stop it." It took Calloway less than 4 hours to make arrangements. At 2 a.m., a government-issued black Suburban rolled quietly into Marlowe. No sirens, no lights. It parked 2 blocks from Granger's auto. A man with a trimmed beard and a military bearing stepped out and knocked softly on the garages. "Side door, Mr. Granger," he said, voice low. "Your ride's here." Tom stepped into the dark vehicle. No questions. No bags. They drove through the night, taking back roads and avoiding cities. Tom didn't speak for hours, watching the horizon roll by, dawn crawling slowly into the rear view. He hadn't been this far from Marlowe in years. He wasn't sure if he'd ever go back. By noon the next day, Tom arrived at a decommissioned missile silo just west of Kearney, Nebraska. On the surface, it looked like a livestock depot abandoned and sun-bleached. But underground, steel doors opened into a functioning intelligence cell built by those who had learned never to trust open networks. Calloway met him at the entrance. He was older, grayer, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "You look like hell," he said. "I feel worse." They walked down a narrow corridor lined with humming servers and rotating surveillance feeds. The air smelled like recycled coolant and adrenaline. Around them, analysts monitored traffic from all over the country, flagging electromagnetic pulses. Digital pings, unusual outages. Tom was shown to a room with a whiteboard, a terminal, and a map of the U.S. with active grid overlays. He took a breath, opened the Aegis drive, and plugged it in. For the next 5 hours, Tom briefed a small team of specialists on every element of the box, its origins, its potential, and how to trace it. They cross-referenced it with the Marlow outage, matching frequency spikes and radii estimates. The blackout had lasted exactly 6 minutes and 28 seconds, overlapping 2 minor substations and 1 emergency service network. It was surgical. No fire, no explosion, just absence. Calloway looked pale. This wasn't random. He sighed. This was a field test. Controlled, measured. They're calibrating, which means they're close to deployment, Tom added. And we don't know where. Calloway glanced at the map. They could hit D.C., L.A., New York, Dallas. Cripple airspace, communications, even nuclear readiness. Tom leaned against the table, his hands trembling slightly. And we have to find them first. As he stared at the map, a horrible thought crossed his mind. One that twisted his gut and made his heart hammer. What if this wasn't about power? What if this was about control? A silent weapon. No fire, no blast radius. No deaths until the machines stop, the power shuts down, and cities collapse under their own weight. And no one would know who to blame, unless someone stopped it first. They found the second pulse 3 days later. It happened in Bakersfield, California, 2:43 a.m., local time. Power cut across 6 city blocks for exactly 4 minutes. Street cameras went dead. Hospital backups failed for 12 seconds. An air traffic control beacon blinked off and back on again, with no explanation. To the public, it was reported as a routine grid fluctuation. To Tom and the small team buried beneath Nebraska, it was confirmation, the box or something like. It was now fully mobile. Tom stood over the map, watching a blinking red circle pulse over central California. He pinched the bridge of his nose, sleep-deprived, jaw tight. That wasn't a test, he muttered. That was a live rehearsal. Calloway nodded grimly. And whoever's behind this isn't just copying your design. They're refining it. He motioned toward the screen, where frequency patterns from the Marlow blackout and the Bakersfield pulse overlapped. They weren't identical, but they were close. Close enough to share DNA, close enough to carry a signature, and right there nested, deep in the waveform, was something Tom hadn't expected. A timestamp, hidden, encoded in the pulse pattern. The kind of thing only a designer would recognize. The numbers were subtle. 17.426. Tom froze. He stepped forward, stared at it, reading it again at 17.42.06. It wasn't just a time. It was a marker. It was the time down to the second that. The whisper kite test had failed back in 1987. No one outside of Unit R would know that number. It had never been made public. It wasn't even in the debrief logs, which meant, "This isn't a copycat," Tom said quietly. Calloway turned. "What do you mean?" "This is Unit R." The room fell silent. The analysts exchanged uneasy glances. Only Calloway didn't react. He just stared harder at the waveform, arms crossed, as if confirming a suspicion he'd hoped to suppress. "I thought they were all shut down," Calloway said after a moment. That after Whisperkite collapsed, command fractured, and the whole unit was dissolved. It was, Tom said. On paper. But if someone kept the tech, they wouldn't just hide, Tom continued. They'd wait, develop it privately, use civilian infrastructure, strip the design down, and build it lean. He gestured to the waveform again. They're not broadcasting power anymore. They're broadcasting intent. Calloway looked like he was aging in real time. So what are they planning? Tom tapped the screen. They're sending a message. Marlowe was the prod. Bakersfield was the preview. And next? Tom hesitated. They're going to light up a city. Later that night, Tom sat alone in the secure compound's observation chamber. It was a sterile space with glass walls and humming screens, but his mind was miles away. He remembered the faces of Unit R brilliant, reclusive minds like his. People who had no business building weapons, yet did so anyway in the name of defense innovation. And now, at least one of them had turned that knowledge into a ticking time bomb. He thought about her Dr. Lena Hart, that she had been Unit R's field control engineer. Younger than the rest, sharper in ways that terrified even their commanding officers. It had been her idea to embed time-sensitive markers in the test signal to teach the machine to talk to us. She'd said once, if anyone had the knowledge and obsession to revive Whisperkite, it was her. She had vanished after the program was scrubbed. Tom had always suspected she'd gone underground. Now he was sure. The next morning, Tom walked into the command center, clutching a printout of a waveform signature from the Bakersfield Pulse. I need access to satellite backlogs for the Nevada training zones, specifically 87C and 87E. He told Calloway. Calloway raised an eyebrow. Those are Redland. I don't care. They were used by Unit R during off-grid simulations. If Hart's behind this, she'll go where the prototypes first worked. She always believed the location mattered, geomagnetic positioning, atmospheric distortion. The design's as much about space as it is about power. Calloway sighed, but made the call. 2 hours later, they had it. Thermal satellite imaging from 2 nights before anomalous spike near Tonopah, Nevada. Just a blip, lasted under 20 seconds, but it matched the waveform. And more importantly, it matched the box's portable configuration. She tested it in the field. They had her location. Tom looked at the terrain, abandoned bunkers, dead airstrips, salt flats. It was familiar. It was the past. I can find her, he said. Calloway frowned. You're not cleared for deployment. I built the goddamn thing, Cal. You've got analysts. I've got instincts. You've also got half the U.S. government waiting to drag you into a concrete hole the minute this is over. Tom smirked. Then I'd better make it worth their while. By sunset, Tom was in a blacked-out Humvee, riding through desert roads under armed escort. The coordinates were set, a rough zone plotted by a backdoor algorithm patched through a NORAD satellite. He carried nothing but a field pack, a signal reader, and a handheld jammer capable of cutting low-range pulse activation. He'd built it himself 2 decades ago. Never thought he'd use it. The sun dipped behind jagged Nevada peaks, casting long shadows across the salt plains. The wind howled through empty radio towers. All around him, the ghosts of Halcyon whispered through the dark. He felt it in his chest before he saw it. A low hum. Electrical. Wrong. They were close. He stepped out of the Humvee and scanned the ridgeline. And there, half buried in the sand, camouflaged beneath a tarp and cables, was a machine, sleeker than his. More refined. It was the box. Evolved. And standing beside it, arms crossed, staring through binoculars, straight at him, Dr. Lena Hart. Tom's boots crunched in the dry Nevada dust as he stepped forward, hands empty, every breath pulling in the sharp chill of desert night. The air smelled of copper and ozone, faint but familiar ionized air, a signature of activated coils. Ahead of him stood the future he'd once helped design, and the past he could never escape. The box had changed, no longer a crude prototype cobbled together in secrecy. This version was polished, housed in a sleek carbon chassis with nested control terminals. No blinking lights, no obvious buttons. It looked more like an art installation than a weapon deceptively elegant. Terrifyingly real. And standing beside it, cool and composed beneath the stars, was Dr. Lena Hart. Her hair had gone white at the edges, pulled tight behind her head. Tactical clothing, minimal gear, eyes that hadn't softened a bit since '87. I was wondering when they'd send the ghost, she said, not looking away from her control tablet. Tom stopped 10 feet away. I came on my own. Lena raised a brow. You always were a bad follower. Tom's eyes moved to the box, then back to her. Why, Lena? She finally met his gaze. Because it was never supposed to be buried. We were on the edge of something extraordinary, and they buried it out of fear. Whisperkite failed because they sabotaged it. They called it containment. I call it cowardice. He shook his head slowly. You saw what it did. You know what this pulse can trigger. Air traffic. Grid collapse. Nuclear chain of command. That's the point, she interrupted, stepping closer. Power without accountability collapses society from the top. The box levels it. The moment you hit the switch, no one special. No private satellites. No protected corridors. No command-only comms. We're back to fire and steel, and who can hold it steady? Tom stared. You think you're resetting the world? No, I'm correcting it. Her hand hovered near the terminal's activation screen. A faint hum pulsed from the coils warming up. Tom's eyes widened. You're not testing again. You're launching. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing the screen. A countdown had begun. 0 to 249. First wave hits San Diego, she said calmly. Second, an hour later, targets Langley. Third is classified. She smirked at her own joke. Tom lunged forward, but before he could reach the panel, a mechanical arm emerged from the box's side and extended a barrier shield projected from high-density field plates. It knocked him back with a hum. Failsafe, Lena said casually. You were always better at building the core. I perfected the shell. Tom got up, panting, mind racing. If he couldn't reach it, he'd have to outthink it. 3 waves. You're trying to make them think it's coming from a foreign actor. Lena's smile didn't waver. Or a rogue cell. Or solar flares. Or AI error. Doesn't matter. The point is confusion. Collapse. And then opportunity. You don't want collapse. You want control. I want a future where people like us engineers decide the rules. Tom stared, devastated. This isn't justice, Lena. It's annihilation. The countdown ticked. 0 hours, 1 minute, and 31 seconds. He slowly reached for his belt and activated the portable jammer. A quiet chime sounded. Lena raised an eyebrow. That old thing? You designed it for early cores. This one's layered, pulse-hardened. He kept it active anyway, backing toward the ridge, looking for the right angle. She followed. I knew you'd find me, she said. Part of me wanted you to. Why? To see the moment you realized the world would change without you. The countdown continued. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 57 seconds. Tom's fingers brushed against a secondary switch on the jammer, a frequency override he'd once designed for emergency shutoffs. But this box, it wasn't his. It wasn't bound to his systems. And if it triggered, if it reached full charge, thousands would suffer. He made a choice. He lunged, not for the box, but for Lena, tackled her hard to the ground, jarring the control tablet from her hand. It skittered across the dust, crashing against a rock and sparking as the screen cracked. The countdown froze at 0 hours 0 minutes and 46 seconds, flickering, a glitch in the system. She cursed and clawed at him, but he was already up, grabbing a metal rod from the yard. "Equipment pile," she screamed. "You don't get to erase me again." "I'm not erasing you," Tom growled. "I'm ending this." He swung the rod into the side panel, where the coil vents regulated pressure. Sparks flew. A high-pitched whine pierced the night. The box shuddered. Lena screamed, "No!" "You'll trigger it manually." But Tom didn't stop. He struck again, then yanked the fail-safe shield's actuator. Cable and pulled it free. The terminal blinked. Manual override initiated critical error emission pathway. UNSDA Bileton ripped open the coil. Chamber reached into the core and twisted the magnetic coil off its mount. His hand burned skin, splitting from the heat, but he kept going. Then, silence. The hum died. The lights on the box dimmed. The countdown collapsed. System offline. Elena lay in the dust, staring up at the sky, breath ragged. "You destroyed it," she whispered. Tom knelt beside her, panting, blood on his fingers. "No," he said. "I stopped you." By dawn, black helicopters circled the area. Calloway's team secured the site. Tom stood at the edge of the ridge as agents swarmed over the wreckage of the box, confiscating parts, documenting every inch. Lena was taken into custody. Tom said nothing. He watched the sun rise over the desert, quiet red line crawling up the horizon. Just like it had in 1987, the morning after Whisperkite fell. But this time, there was no test. No blackout. No war. Just one man, scarred and silent, watching history shift because he had finally chosen not to build, but to break. Epilogue. Tom Granger never returned to Marlow. The garage was sold quietly to a veteran's family. Locals said he'd left to be with a sister out west. Others said he'd gone off-grid entirely, but those who knew him truly knew. Him understood this. He was never just a small-town mechanic. He was a man who once held the power to blind cities, silence nations, and chose instead to walk away.